Hi, I want to talk about the experience background of various Australian politicians, particularly, almost exclusively on the ALP side. I've tended to vote Labor most of my life, but looking into the current Labor leaders reveals they've had very little work experience of real substance. Take Albanese, for instance. He's in his early 60s now. He did a university course and then he joined the Labor Party office and worked his way up the office as a staffer, advisor, etc., organiser. But he hasn't worked in a real job. He hasn't worked as a public servant, a teacher, let alone as in private enterprise. He's not been a small business person or a tradesman with a contract type job. He's just worked for the Labor Party, the Australian Labor Party, and this means he's very limited. The same with the Premier Minns. He's done a few other little odd jobs, but nothing of any substance. And he, like Albanese, has worked in the Labor Party office and he's crawled his way up the greasy pole, but has had little work experience. He's got a degree in some kind of social science / management from a prominent American university, but of course that's no substitute for experience. When you haven't worked, even as a public servant or a teacher, you've merely been working in the Labor office. You haven't really interacted with the world. Now, this is also true of the current Premier of Victoria, Jacinta Allan, who got a university degree and then went into the Labor office. The Premier before her, Andrews, I can't even think of his first name now, he was the same, never had a real job. Why is a real job important? Well, I'll give you a few analogies. Imagine you've read all about the road rules for Australia, let's say New South Wales, and you've studied how a car engine works, and you've read about how to drive. But imagine you've never driven a car in your life, and you suddenly have to drive a car on the main roads in Sydney and the freeways. Imagine if you had to drive a vehicle like an ambulance or any kind of vehicle, but you've never actually been behind the wheel. You wouldn't be able to do it without someone assisting you unless you were very, very gifted. I guess some young people steal a car and manage to get away with it, but they usually crash the car in the end, trying to run away from the police. So it's no good just knowing the theory. You've got to have practical experience, and in fact, experience running a business, as a manager in a business, as a manager or supervisor in the public service, as a teacher, makes your theory, let's say, more closely refined, honed, because you realise what works and what doesn't. Now, with my TAFE teaching, not with my primary and high school teaching, I had to have 5 years experience outside of university and outside of any kind of teaching, 5 years experience in the real world. It could actually be in the public service or private enterprise before they would hire me as a teacher of English and communications. That was the rule. I don't know whether it still is the rule, but it should be. I found some subjects I had to teach difficult because I'd never worked actually in, let's say, marketing. I couldn't give concrete examples. I couldn't give perspective to a lot of the theory that I was teaching because I hadn't actually worked in marketing. So I think Minns, Albanese, Jacinta Allan, and previously Andrews should never have been accepted for the jobs because they just didn't have the practical experience. I'm aghast that the newspapers and media haven't pointed this shortcoming out very clearly.
Have you also talked to Alex Antic, the Liberal senator also in South Australia? He'd be perfect for you and would give you immediately another Senate seat as well. Any interest there?
No, I haven't spoken to Alex Antic, and I agree with you. Alex is another person that I see sheer frustration with the coalition, especially the Liberal Party that he is a part of, in not representing, the Australian people. I get on very well with Alex. Have I approached him? No, I haven't. That's something that these people must consider for themselves. Is One Nation a good fit for them? As Barnaby said, I never force my hand on anyone. I give them time to think about it. But also, Andrew, I'll make it quite clear. I'm not going to just take anyone from political parties that see that, the ship's sinking, we must jump over. I'm going to look at their performance, what they've stood for, what they represent. Are they hard workers? Are they there for the right reasons? I don't want career politicians. And if I'm going to build this party in workers, are they there for the right reasons? I don't want career politicians. What they've stood for, what they represent. Are they hard workers? Are they there for the right reasons? I don't want career politicians.
I'm Isabel Hardman, and my book, Why We Get the Wrong Politicians, looks at the problems with our politics in this country. It's not a rogues gallery of all the MPs I've met whilst being a political journalist who I don't like or I find annoying, but it actually looks at the political system, it looks at how people get into politics, it looks at how much they know about legislation before they start looking at it. And I've really discovered that even though I'm quite defensive of politicians individually, I think generally they're in it for the right reasons, or at least the same mixture of motives that the rest of us have for doing our jobs, that actually Parliament is dysfunctional and it is letting people down and it is producing policies which can cause catastrophes in voters' lives. So, for instance, it costs on average around £11,000 of your own money to stand for Parliament. That's not the money that parties spend on leaflets and so on, but the cost of standing, the cost of having to give up your job and work for free for maybe up to 2 years just to have the chance of becoming an MP, which makes it the most expensive and time-consuming job interview in the world. I've also looked at the way bills move through Parliament. So you'd expect that MPs would spend most of their time looking at the laws that the government's making to make sure that they work. At least that's what I expected when I started as a political journalist. But what I've discovered is that there's much more theatre to it, and that really MPs in the governing party will go into a bill committee, for instance, which is supposed to do line-by-line scrutiny of legislation, and they will vote just how their whips from the governing party tell them to vote, which means that even if a piece of legislation is really poorly drafted and is going to have terrible consequences for ordinary people, and we can all think of examples of those bills, those MPs will still support that legislation just because they've been told that their job is to get it through Parliament quickly and without much trouble. And that's a real scandal, I think, that we have bills, for instance, on legal aid or welfare reform, and I've looked at some of those in the book, that are going through that, and MPs do not know what their implications actually are until the crises turn up in their constituency surgeries. And then they then go back to Parliament and say, this terrible thing has happened. Well, actually, they were the ones who voted on it in the first place. I also look at MPs' personal lives and how miserable it can actually be to be an MP. They have a very high rate of relationship breakdown, very high rate of mental illness, to the extent that the parliamentary authorities have set up a special psychiatric service for MPs because there are so many problems. Again, addictions are a real problem. And if you're watching this and thinking, well, why on earth should I feel sorry for MPs? They've chosen to do this. They're the fools who are doing this stupid job. I can get on with my job and be a bit more normal. Then you should at least feel sorry for yourself, because people who are going through these crises will naturally find it harder to concentrate on their jobs, and therefore we will end up with worse laws as a result, and they will affect all of us, not MPs. At the end of the book, I do propose some solutions as well. I don't just leave you feeling incredibly miserable at the state of our politics, and I think there are changes that can be made to Parliament, to the structure and the culture of Parliament, that would mean we get much better policies and better politicians. And I really hope that people who read this book will feel galvanised, maybe not to become MPs, perhaps they might be put off from that, but to see change in the political system so that we aren't so angry with our MPs and we aren't so frequently disappointed with what they produce on our behalf.
And there's the book, Why We Get the Wrong Politicians, Isabel Hardman. Sorry about that.